forget the hacking around, don't pay attention to that. Joshua chapter 2, verse 12. We're going to pick right back up with our lesson from last week. And last week we started chapter 2 and talking about the spies who entered into Jericho to see essentially what the resistance, I guess, would be a good way to put it, what the resistance would be to the Israelites coming in to conquer. And we saw through the first 11 verses of chapter 2 last week that for the most part, people of Jericho scared to death of the Israelites and what they could potentially do because of the previous things in which God has done for them, crossing the Red Sea, 10 plagues in Egypt. The reputation, pretty much, or God's reputation, pretty much was the reason for the fear. And we know that the spies were in there and they had to hide because the king was wanting to know where they were at. He didn't want to send them back to the Israelites because they're going to go back with the information that Jericho is scared, right? So they found Rahab. Went to Rahab. She hid them, of course. We know the story very well as we read through those 11 verses. And we stopped last week at verse number 11. So we're going to pick up there in verse number 12 today with the response here that Rahab had and the faith that she showed as well. I mentioned a little bit of this last week, but we will kind of get more into it here today. Okay, so 12, 13, and 14 of chapter 2, we're going to see Rahab's request. We then see Rahab's test down through verse number 21, and then that leads us into the last part of this in which the spies have a response as well, and that's what we're going to be looking at here through the end of the chapter. So let's read verses 12, 13, and 14 to start off with here and talk about Rahab and the request that she has. Now, therefore, verse 12 says, I pray, that swear unto me by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, that you will also show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token, that ye will save alive my father, my mother, my brethren, my sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. And the men answered her, Our life for yours, if ye utter not this our business. And it shall be, the Lord hath giveth us the land, that we will deal kindly and truly with thee. So Rahab's fear here of God, right? Rahab's fear of what God could potentially do to Jericho is what moved her to have this faint-heartedness as well, right? She uses some plural nouns here in verses 11. If you look back up at it, she uses we and she uses our, like in reference to the people there, right? The people who she was living with. In verse 11, and as soon as we had heard these things, right, our hearts melted. So she's kind of encompassing herself with the same attitude as far as fear that the other people of the other Jerichoites had as well. Okay. And that was a result, of course, from the fear of God. But instead of remaining frozen by fear, which is what the king was and what the rest of the people were, she chose here to put her faith in God. Okay, she understands the stupidity of standing in the way of the God of Israel, who has destroyed Egypt, the whole army there, across the Red Sea, defeated enemies already on the eastern side of Jordan, and so on and so forth. So she wanted to be on the side of God in heaven and above and in earth, okay, earth beneath. Go to James chapter 2. Keep your little bookmarker finger there in Joshua. We'll be right back to it. But go to James chapter 2. And go down to verse 21. James 2, verse 21, down through the rest of the chapter. Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered Isaac his son up to the altar? Seest thou how faith wrought with his works, and by works was faith made perfect? And the scripture was fulfilled, which saith, Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness. And he was called the friend of God. Ye see then how that by works a man is justified, not by faith only. Likewise also was not Rahab the harlot justified by works, when she had received the messengers and sent them out another way. For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. What showed that Rahab had saving faith in God? What showed that she had faith that God could save them? Her actions, her works, right? The things that she did. Just like Abraham offering up Isaac, there was evidence of his faith as well. She hid the spies and was deceitful for the spies because she was placing her faith in God. She was placing her faith in God for her safety and her salvation as well. Okay? Hebrews chapter 11. Spent quite a bit of time talking about this with Pastor Rob, but we'll look at it again. Verse 31. I'll give you a second to get there. Hebrews 11:31 says this, by faith, again, the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not, when she had received the spies with peace. So what does this say about the about the timing of Rahab's faith? What was the timing here of Rahab's faith? She trusted in God before or after the spies arrived? Go back. By faith, the harlot perished not with them that believed not, when she had received the spies with peace. Was Rahab trusting in God before or after the spies showed up? Before, right? Before. Even before the spies arrived at her doorstep, she was already trusting in God for her salvation, right? Rahab's choice to trust in God was life-changing. She made the choice. She had to. If the spies weren't even there yet, but she thought to herself, these old boys show up, right? I have to help them. Try to help them in some way. Her choice to trust in God is life-changing, and then her exercising her faith, right, by taking care of these guys, hiding them, making sure they were safe, and protecting them, that was going to contribute to what? Hiding the spies is going to contribute to what? In the grand scheme of things of the city. Destruction, right? Taking care of the enemy, the quote-unquote enemy of Jericho, and hiding those spies is going to result in the destruction of the city. That's what those guys were there for, to check it out. So she was willing to protect the spies at the expense of the life that she knew, the life that she had grown accustomed to, the life that she was comfortable with, right? Her house, right? The people she was around, her friends, so on and so forth. The list goes on of the things that she had probably built and was accustomed to having. Now, you could argue that living a life of a harlot is not much of a life, right? You can make that argument, sure. But regardless of that, the desire to protect the life that one is comfortable with, right? The life that you know is strong. Now, obviously, Rahab's job here at least afforded her what? Did she have a house? Yes, right? Obviously, probably had food to eat, right? She was probably, probably not living lavishly, but she was comfortable and had her needs taken care of. She was able to, purchase the things that she needed to. So, understanding that was all going to go away. The way in which she was earning a living was all going to go away if she took care of these spies, but she did it anyhow, right? Rahab was certain here that faith in Israel's God, right? Faith in Israel's God was the only choice that would actually be able to protect her and her family from the coming destruction of the city of Jericho. She obviously here fearing God more than she feared the king. So back to verse 12 here of Joshua chapter 2. Right, she begs here the spies to swear by her something, right? Now therefore I pray you, excuse me, Swear unto me by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, that you will also show kindness unto me, my father, and give me a what? A true token, right? She wanted to swear here. She wanted the spies to swear to her by a true token. And what true token is here? This was essentially a pledge of truth. Okay? The pledge of truth is that they would, in fact, show her kindness when they came back to destroy the city. And she reminds them that she had, in fact, already showed them kindness, and she wanted them to offer her the same in recompense, okay? By hiding them and taking care of them. So it appears here as if the spies were at the mercy of Rahab as long as they were in Rahab's house. Because all Rahab would have had to have done is open a door and like, hey, they're right here. Here they are, right? And those guys probably would have been killed. At least thrown into prison at the least. Probably killed. So as long as they were there, they were kind of at her mercy, right? She could have delivered them to the king at any moment. But Rahab realizes that she was actually the one that was at their mercy in the grand scheme of things. So she asked the spies to save alive her family when they came to destroy the city. Okay? Verse 13. Give me the true token, right? Verse 12. And that ye will save alive my father, my mother, brother, and my sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. It's interesting there, right? She doesn't just ask them to, I think it's save alive seems redundant when you read it, right? You take a second and just read it. It seems redundant, right? And that ye will save alive my father, right? Could have easily just said, I want you to save us. There's a reason that is used in that way. Okay, save alive my father, my brethren, and all of these people that we have, right? The phrase save alive, Rahab may have simply just been requesting that the spies take her family into custody when they showed up without having them executed. The spies promised that they would not just save alive them, keep them alive, but they would show kindness as long as the family kept the secret, right? Verse 14. If the men answered the men answered her, our life for yours, if you utter not this our business, and it shall be that when the Lord hath given us this land, I'm not just going to deal with you, we'll deal with you kindly, we'll not just save alive you, we'll make sure that you're taken care of. So Rahab initially had a problem, understood the solution to that problem was faith in God. And then as we know that because of Rahab's faith in God, God didn't just save alive Rahab and her family. God exalts Rahab, right? And the line that she eventually is used for. God doesn't just take care of problems, right? He covers them completely when He makes the decision and takes care of things. He always does things greater than we can possibly even imagine when we express total faith and trust in Him. So Rahab here set aside logic, put her faith in God's sovereign power, and she stayed put even though she faced some serious uncertainties. And she believed that God would and could protect her. What would you say would be a logical thing that Rahab would have done once the city was on lockdown? What's a logical thing for Rahab to do once the city gets thrown on lockdown? All right, so let's think here. Right? The spies leave. She helps them escape. The city goes on lockdown. We haven't got there, but how do the spies escape? Down a rope, right? They do. They down a rope and they take off, and the city's on lockdown, and then Rahab's still there. What's the logical thing for Rahab to do at this point when the city's on lockdown? get rid of the rope or go down the rope herself and take off, right? That's a logical thing to do. It's not what she does, though, right? She sets logic aside. She doesn't use the rope herself to get her and her family out as well. She sits and waits and puts her faith in God's sovereign power. Now, out of all the people in Jericho, what's the reason God saved this lowly harlot? What's the reason God saved her? She responded, right? She responded in the midst of a trial, right? Of a problem. And her life shows that anyone can come to God by faith and receive forgiveness of sins. Rahab didn't do anything to merit salvation, but she had faith. Rahab's fear was filled with hope that God would provide a way for her to be rescued from the certain destruction that was coming. The people's fear was filled with helplessness. They had desperately tried to control this situation on their own, but in their hearts they had already knew that the city was doomed, right? That God responded, though, to Rahab's highly unlikely faith and rescues her. The town harlot, certain destruction, and in doing so showed that God is gracious and forgiving. His justice can be overruled by His mercy and His grace if the condemned simply just responds in faith. The story here, Rahab, right? Heard a million times, sure. A beautiful illustration of the redeeming love of God. That's what this is, right? A beautiful illustration of God's redeeming love. It also shows, not just His redeeming love, but it also shows that He had a strong desire for the inhabitants of Canaan, the heathenites here. He had a strong desire for the heathenites. He wanted to love them. He desired to spare them their lives, but His justice would not allow them to continue to escape judgment any longer because of the way they have been living, right? And the end here is very near. Verse 22. Oh, shoot, I haven't read the rest of it. Sorry. Let's read 15 down to 21. I hadn't got there yet. I got ahead of myself. Sorry. Let's go to verse 15. No wonder why when I got to the rope, everybody was looking at me like I was crazy. Then she let down by a cord through the window, for her house was upon the town wall, and she dwelt upon it. And she said unto them, Get you to the mountain, lest the pursuers meet you, and hide yourselves there 3 days until the pursuers be returned, and afterward may ye go your way. And the men said unto her, We will be blameless unto this thine oath, which thou hast made us swear. Behold, when we come into the land, thou shalt bind this line of scarlet thread in the window, which thou didst let us down by, and thou shalt bring thy father and thy mother and brethren and all thy father's house hold home unto thee. And it shall be that whosoever shall go out the doors of the house into the street, his blood shall be upon his head, and he'll be guiltless. And whosoever shall be within the house of his blood shall be on our head, if any hand be upon him. And if thou utter this our business, then we will be quit of thine oath, which thou hast made us to swear. Excuse me. She said, According unto your word, so be it. And she sent them away, and they parted, and she bound the scarlet line in the window. Almost skipped a whole very important part of this, didn't I? All right, so that's the test there that she gives the spies, and of course, as we have talked about, laying down the scarlet cord, the spies getting out that way, and then them telling her that, like, as long as people's inside the house, scarlet ropes outside the window, everything's good. Stick your head out, see what's going on, you're going to die. Okay, so this is the response, and this is what she is going to have to do. Okay? All right, now we get to verse 22. Sorry. Go ahead, Chad. So we see the test, and now we see the spies' response to God as well. Okay, now at this point in verse 22 and 23, the spies are going to return back to the camp. Okay, return back to Joshua here. After the men of Jericho, they had to wait 3 days, right? The men of Jericho have suspended the search for them, and they tell Joshua exactly what has happened, verse 22 and 23. And they went and came unto the mountain and abode there 3 days until the pursuers returned, and the pursuers sought them through all the way, but found them not. So the two men returned and descended from the mountain and passed over and came to Joshua, the son of Nun, and told him all the things that befell them. So they get back after it's important here, right? If we go back over and look at verse 16, okay. I think this is kind of an important thing that sometimes we kind of gloss over. So in verse 16, who's talking here? Rahab, right? Rahab is the one that's talking. And she's telling his old boys to do what? Get to the mountains and do what? 3 days, right? Wait for 3 days. And then we see them listening to her. They wait for 3 days. So apparently, Rahab has a knowledge of how the military works, right, or how the king's guard works, right? Apparently, she obviously has seen this, at least to a certain degree, happen before, right? Because she knew specifically that if you go out there and you wait and they can't find you in 3 days, they're going to come what? They're going to come right back, all right? Now, it would have been very easy for the Israelites here, the spies, to get out there and get hidden, and then after a day or two, take off. Right? I can see myself doing that. They ain't found me in 2 days. They ain't gonna find me in 3. Right? As soon as I know they're gone, I'm gonna take off and get back. Right? That's not what. So there was obviously something. They had either perimeter set up. Right? There was a process that they used to scour the mountainsides to find people who had deserted, right, or were trying to get out of the city. And Rahab had a working knowledge of this policy, I guess would be a good way to put it, and explained to them how to not just where to hide, but how long to hide there. And then we see the Israelites doing as she said, right? So another important thing here that, these guys didn't have to listen. They didn't. Rahab, for some reason, knew this. We don't know why, but she did, obviously. And this is the reason in which they were able to get back to Joshua and explain to them what had exactly happened. Now, how do you think the spies related their story to Joshua as they were telling the story? Do you think they were animated? Do you think they were very just matter of fact? Look at verse 23. So the two returned and descended from the mountain and passed over and came to Joshua the son of Nun and told him all the things that befell them. How do you think the meeting here between Joshua and the spies went? What do you think? And they were just kind of matter of fact, we went to Rahab's house and kept us there for a couple days and we hid in the woods. Do you think that's how it went? I don't. Right? I think that they had witnessed God's sovereignty. They had lived God's sovereignty and protection over their lives, right? They had been a part in divine intervention. These old boys should have been dead. They should have been, right? The king was after him. The people were after him. They knew they were there, right? They looked different than all these. They should have been dead. But this lowly harlot, was the only person in the whole city that was protective of them and took care of them. And they listened to her. And because they listened to her, they were in fact back now. I imagine these boys were talking so fast. Joshua was like, hey, take a breath, right? I'm sure they were excited because they had God work directly in their lives in Jericho. Specifically and precise things had taken place that most assuredly had a deep impact on them. They also recognized God working in the heart of Rahab. Ahead of time, right? Before they even showed up, God's been working on her heart because she made the decision to help them. So they could hear her report about Jericho and get away safely. So God's sovereign power had the only way they could explain this very unusual, peculiar, unexpected sequence of events that had taken place. In addition to that, right, they felt the fear that Jericho had in response to God's display of his power and sovereignty at the Red Sea, eastern battles of the Jordan River, so on and so forth, right? So this would have bolstered their faith even more. Then we get to verse 24, and we see the spies' certainty here. So they tell Joshua all these things. They're probably rattling off as fast as they could. And in verse 24, and they said unto Joshua, truly the Lord hath delivered into our hands all the land, for even all the inhabitants of the city. Does it say city of Jericho there? It doesn't, does it? What does it say? So what are they talking about here? The whole thing, right? The whole area of Canaan. We've been to Jericho. We've seen the response. Surely God hath delivered into our hands all of the land, for even the inhabitants of the entire country of Canaan faint because of us. First military battle. First set of spies that show up in the first city they're going to conquer. They go in to get a lay of the land, see what the enemy's like. They have this, out-of-body essentially experience that's taken place now over the course of probably a week, in which they have seen X, Y, Z, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, and God has showed up in their lives specifically, and they've seen evidence of it. And they get running back to Joshua, and they go, Joshua, you have the city. That ain't no problem. The whole country's ripe for the taking. God has delivered the entire country to us. All we got to do is show up, right? We see their faith being fortified, being strengthened, because God has shown them specific things, right? So what initially they have is this great confidence in God. You would think that when they get to points later on in this conquest, when things maybe don't look as good, all they would have to do is look back to Jericho and what took place, and that should re-fortify their faith. But we know this don't happen, right? That's not exactly what takes place. But they see here that God is sovereign, that God is powerful, and that there is nothing or no one, no wall, no city, no sword, no bow and arrow, no army, no anything that is able to stand against them or foil the plan that he has for Israel to give them the promised land. The spies had no doubt that all of the promised land was in fact theirs. Why is it so important for Israel to be assured of God's sovereign power at this point in their history? So think of where Israel's at right now, right? As we're reading this, not today. In this time frame here with Joshua as their leader. Why is it really important for them to be assured of God's sovereignty at this point in their history? Why is it important they have this confidence in God's sovereignty?
They refused that first.
They refused it 40 years ago, right? And then they didn't get to go in and take it over. Right? And also, what were they going to have to go through and conquer this promised land? Faith and a reliance on God's power and his sovereignty, right? Yeah, Jericho's a big city. But what else is in the land of Canaan? Go ahead, you can say it like it's not a dirty word. Giants, right? There be giants in there, right? And multitudes of them, and armies probably of them, realistically, if you look at some of the history of it. In big, huge cities, bigger than Jericho. Sure, been there longer, probably. More powerful, absolutely. Right? So they are going to have to rely on the sovereignty of God's power in order to fully realize the conquest of the promised land. The conquest was not about what they were going to face, because it was crazy, and we'll talk about some of it. That's not that's not what the conquest was about. The conquest was about what? Them trusting God, right? Them trusting God. It wasn't about the giants and the all the things. And some of the great technologies that I think some of these civilizations probably had they were up against. It wasn't about that. This is about them trusting in God. Go ahead, Chad, bring up the last thing. So the account of Rahab and the spies here shows us that faith is the proper response to God's sovereign power. And while God has not called us to conquer a promised land, right, we have to still rely on God and trust His sovereign power as we live. Right? So we have evidence here of God's sovereignty, the Red Sea crossing, and victories over the Sihon and Og there on the eastern side of the Jericho. And because of that, their hearts had melted in fear of God. The response here of Rahab, we see, of course, puts her faith in God. We have evidence of God's sovereignty as well, because Jericho's fear of the Israelites, and then Rahab's faith in God because of His power. And then the spies declared their confidence in God as well, because they trusted Rahab. They get back to Joshua and tell him that God's pretty much done this for us anyways. All we have to do is simply just show up. Go ahead, Chad. Last thing. What excuses here, not here, but God's sovereign power encourages faith. But what could excuses for not serving God might the account here in Joshua 2 help to dispel? What excuses for not serving God might this account dispel? How about this one? I wrote this one down. God can't use me because I've ruined my life. Heard that one before, maybe, or maybe thought that one, right? God doesn't care about what I can do because I'm not that important. God only uses people who deserve to be used. Right? That's not excuses that can be brought forth at all, especially when considering the account of what Rahab was able to do. Okay? God's sovereign power encourages faith in Him. That's what the overarching thing here of Joshua chapter 2 is at. So what we do here now in the history of this, or this account, this story, this diatribe that we're going through, the spies are back, right? They have swam, forged, paddled, whatever, get back across the Jordan, show up and tell Joshua, all right, onward. Right? This is no problem. This is will be a easy victory for us. All right. So Joshua says, okay. And we see in chapter number 3, as we'll get there, God is going to lead the Israelites to the Jordan. And then one more time, He's going to part the waters of a area that is unable to be crossed, right? To cross over. And the Israelites are going to follow that ark and set up a memorial to the event to help further generations concerning. So we begin to see the start, the little lance marching there across, right, to get to start the conquest over Canaan. So next week is them following that ark, essentially, across the Jordan River. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank You for this lesson as we get to move through here this book of Joshua and all the interesting things that are there for us to study. Lord, it's important for us to remember that we also, in the midst of anything, should have the faith like Rahab, the ability, Lord, to be fully reliant on Your sovereignty and the faith, Lord, that comes with it, and then how that's a requirement for us that You desire so that You can be glorified and honored in all that we do. And pray for Pastor Rob here as well as he comes. The next little bit, Lord, we have our service, that You will use him in a mighty way. Keep us attentive to the word You have for us as well through him, Lord, in Your name I pray. Amen.